Hey peeps, we're going to deep dive into Carrie by Stephen King. This was first published in 1974, and the success for Carrie was so crazy, was so big back in the day. It was just mind-blowing. King writes about his success story in his book On Writing, which is a book on how to be a better writer. Highly suggest picking that up, literally just for his success story. It was beautiful. I remember crying. Also, we need to thank Tabitha King, which is his wife, for picking it out of the trash and reading it and telling him that it was something and to keep going. So King's got a love-hate relationship with chapters. I don't know what it is. He'll have like a chapter and then he'll have like 30 something odd parts within the chapter. I don't understand it. But anyways, in this book, he doesn't have any chapters. He has 3 parts, and that's all he has separating this. The story starts off with a news clipping. News item from the Westover Weekly Enterprise, August 19th, 1966. Rains of stones reported. It was reliably reported by several persons that a rain of stones fell from a clear blue sky on Carlin Street in the town of Chamberlain on August 17th. The stones fell principally on the home of Mrs. Margaret White, damaging the roof extensively and ruining 2 gutters and a downspout valued at approximately $25. Mrs. White, a widow, lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Carrie. Mrs. White could not be reached for comment. Side note, I love the name Carrie. And side note, we have to remember this book was published in 1974. So I was like, $25, who cares? But it was different back then, you know? So from the very beginning of the story, there is just so much disdain for Carrie, and honestly, it's a little unwarranted to me. Later in the story, we find out that her first interaction with the public, she went to school holding a Bible, so she was picked on for that. And then she got down on her knees to pray before lunch, the one and only time she's ever done that in public because of the ridicule that followed. But honestly, I mean, I remember kids like that in school. I mean, there wasn't a lot, but you know what I'm saying? Like, and none of them were picked on to this extent. Like, this is really extreme. Was it the times? I don't think so. Like, yes, I think there was more bullying back. I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent. I think it's just a little much, okay? Also, we know that Carrie has telekinesis powers. I'm going to be calling it powers throughout this, even though whatever. So these powers that she has, we know she has it from the very beginning. It's not a secret to us. It's only a secret to the people we're following. So our first impressions of Carrie is the infamous shower scene. This is where we first get our glimpse of Carrie in the book. Carrie stood among them stolidly, a frog among swans. She was a chunky girl with pimples on her neck and back and buttocks, her wet hair completely without color. It rested against her face with dispirited sogginess, and she simply stood, head slightly bent, letting the water splash against her flesh and roll off. She looked the part of the sacrificial goat, the constant butt, believer in left-handed monkey wrenches, perpetual foul up, and she was. She wished forlornly and constantly that Ewan High had individual and thus private showers, like the high schools at Westover or Lewiston. They stared. They always stared. Even the teachers were asswipes, okay? The teachers were also mean to Carrie. Again, I don't understand it. If you're supposed to have a safe space or a safe person to go to in a school, it's the teachers. Not all of them are great, but this teacher was specifically, she's not great, okay? Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the gym teacher, Miss Desjardins. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I hope I am, because I'm going to be referring to her as gym teacher or Desjardins through this whole thing. So Miss Desjardins, their slim, non-breasted gym teacher, stepped in, craned her neck around briefly, and slapped her hands together once smartly. "What are you waiting for, Carrie? Doom? Bell in 5 minutes." Like, excuse me. Why the snark? Okay? The snark was a little uncalled for, Miss Desjardins. So after the gym teacher yells at Carrie to get out, Carrie shuts the water off and she steps out of the shower as blood starts dripping down her leg. And unfortunately for her, all the girls see it. From The Shadow Exploded, documented facts and specific conclusions derived from the case of Carrie White. It can hardly be disputed that failure to note specific instances of telekinesis during the white girl's earlier years must be attributed to the conclusion offered by White and Stearns in their paper Telekinesis: A Wild Talent Revisited, that the ability to move objects by effort of the will alone comes to the fore only in moments of extreme personal stress. The talent is well hidden indeed. How else could it have remained submerged for centuries with only the tip of the iceberg showing above a sea of quackery? We have only skimpy hearsay evidence upon which to lay our foundation in this case, but even this is enough to indicate that a TK potential of immense magnitude existed within Carrie White. The great tragedy is that we are now all Monday morning quarterbacks. I don't know what that means, Monday morning quarterbacks. But like I said, we already know that Carrie White is telekinetic. Okay, so this book, The Shadow Exploded, is a lot about her powers and like what needs to be done, what could have been done, what could have prevented this, and her sad life. So now we're back, and it starts off with mean girl Chris Hargensen. She gets brought up a lot. She screams period at Carrie, and now all the girls are chanting period at her. And Carrie has no idea what a period is, right? So she's like, period. Like, she doesn't understand what they're saying to her. And when she realizes that she's bleeding, she starts screaming because she has no idea what a period is. Her mother never told her. Her mom never prepared her for this moment. And we'll find out about that a little bit later. Anyways, there's a lot of commotion going on, and Carrie is understandably freaking out. She thinks she's dying, okay? A tampon suddenly struck her in the chest and fell with a plop at her feet. A red flower stained the absorbent cotton and spread. Then the laughter, disgusted, contemptuous, horrified, seemed to rise and bloom into something jagged and ugly, and the girls were bombarding her with tampons and sanitary napkins, some from purses, some from the broken dispenser on the wall. They flew like snow, and the chant became, "Plug it up, plug it up, plug it up, plug it." Sue was throwing them too, throwing and chanting with the rest, not really sure what she was doing. A charm had occurred to her mind, and it glowed there like neon. There's no harm in it, really, no harm in it, really, no harm. It was still flashing and glowing reassuringly when Carrie suddenly began to howl and back away, flailing her arms and grunting and gobbling. Now, I don't appreciate the way King describes Carrie, because yes, she's like the butt of jokes and all, but like grunting and gobbling, Carrie ends up getting back into like the shower area that she just stepped out of, and she kind of slowly crumples to the floor. Like she's just beside herself. She doesn't know what to do. Miss the gym teacher, she comes in to see what all the commotion is about, and she makes all the girls leave so she can help Carrie clean herself up. From The Shadow Exploded, both medical and psychological writers on the subject are in agreement that Carrie White's exceptionally late and traumatic commencement of the menstrual cycle might well have provided the trigger for her latent talent. It seems incredible that as late as 1979, Carrie knew nothing of the mature woman's monthly cycle. It is nearly as incredible to believe that the girl's mother would permit her daughter to reach the age of nearly 17 without consulting a gynecologist concerning the daughter's failure to menstruate. Yet the facts are incontrovertible. That's a weird word. Anyways, when Carrie White realized she was bleeding from the vaginal opening, she had no idea of what was taking place. She was innocent of the entire concept of menstruation. One of her surviving classmates, Ruth Gogan, tells of entertaining the girls' locker room at Ewan High School the year before the events we are concerned with, and seeing Carrie using a tampon to blot her lipstick with. At that time, Miss Gogan said, "What the hell are you up to?" Miss White replied, "Isn't that right?" Miss Gogan then replied, Sure it is." Why? Ruth Gogan let a number of her girlfriends in on this. She later told the interviewer she thought it was a sorta cute. And if anyone tried in the future to inform Carrie of the true purpose of what she was using to make up with, she apparently dismissed the explanation as an attempt to pull her leg. This was a facet of her life, and that she had become exceedingly wary of. So not only is she like the butt of jokes, but they do shit like this. Like, the bullying in this book is kind of severe, if you ask me. I mean, I've read a lot of books, bullying books, things like that, but there's just something that you read through these pages that is so upsetting. The gym teacher, okay? Like I said, she's helping Carrie. However, she thinks Carrie's hysterical, which, I mean, Maybe, but again, she thinks she's dying, and I don't feel like that is an abnormal thought with what she's going through. Anyways, so the gym teacher's like, maybe I should just slap her in the face. So she does, pretty freaking hard to stop the hysterics. But it's like, she wasn't hysterical. People get slapped in this book multiple times because they're hysterical. Let's not do that. So she finally gives her a pad and she's like, come on, Carrie, like you act like you've never done this before. Well, she hasn't, because she gives her a pad and Carrie doesn't know what to do with it. So the gym teacher has to like do it for her, and she helps Carrie and cleans up her legs and stuff. And then she sends her she goes with her to the principal office. From The Shadow Exploded, Carrie White's mother, Margaret White, gave birth to her daughter on September 21st, 1963, under circumstances which can only be termed bizarre. In fact, an overview of the Carrie White case leaves the careful student with one feeling ascendant over all others: that Carrie was the only issue of a family as odd as any of that has ever been brought to popular attention. As noted earlier, Robert White died in February of 1963 when a steel girder fell off of a carrying sling on a housing project job in Portland. Mrs. White continued to live alone in their suburban Chamberlain bungalow. She was born... I'm catching a plot hole, guys. Carrie was born on September, and that same year in February, her dad died. There is a part in this book where Margaret was going to kill her daughter, and Ralph stopped her. But he wasn't alive to stop her. So Desjardins brings Carrie to the vice principal's office, and she's like, hey, I think Carrie should be able to go home. She experienced something pretty traumatic, so let's just give her a slip so she can take the rest of the day off. He doesn't really care. Like, he's like, sure, fine, whatever. The only thing is that the principal is an idiot, and he keeps referring to Carrie as a different name. Like, he cannot keep her name straight in like the 5 minutes that he deals with her. And the vice principal's name is Morton. So it says, Morton gave the girl the yellow slip. You can go now, Cassie, he said magnanimously. That's not my name, she screamed suddenly. Morton recoiled, and Miss Desjardins jumped as if struck from behind. The heavy ceramic ashtray on Morton's desk, it was Rodin's thinker, with his head turned into a receptacle for cigarette butts, suddenly toppled to the rug as if to take cover from the force of her scream. Butts and flakes of Morton's pipe tobacco scattered on the pale green nylon rug. So after that, Carrie leaves for the day, and then the gym teacher kind of explains to Morton what happened with the period thing. I guess she just didn't want to like say it all in front of Carrie and have her relive it. But basically, she explained that Carrie started her period pretty suddenly, and that Chris, the ringleader of the Mean Girls, kind of started it, and her and all of her Mean Girl followers need to be dealt with, and this cannot go unpunished. He agrees, and they take it from there. So as Carrie's walking home, she has thoughts of bashing Chris's head in with boulders, and she wished that it was Judgment Day. If only it would be today, and Jesus coming not with a lamb and a shepherd's crook, but with a boulder in each hand to crush the laughters and the snickerers, to root out the evil and destroy it screaming, a terrible Jesus of blood and righteousness. And if only she could be his sword and his arm. So she's feeling a little vengeful, I'd say, it's not healthy, but I get it. While these thoughts are swirling in Carrie's head, she stumbles upon another little puke bag. Tommy Erbter, age 5, was biking up the other side of the street. He was a small, intense-looking boy on a 20-inch Schwinn with bright red training wheels. He was humming Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Under his breath. He saw Carrie, brightened, and stuck out his tongue. Hey, old fart face, old prayin' Carrie. Carrie glared at him with sudden smoking rage. The bike wobbled on its training wheels and suddenly fell over. Tommy screamed. The bike was on top of him. Carrie smiled and walked on. The sound of Tommy's wheels were sweet, jangling music in her ears. If only she could make something like that happen whenever she liked. Just did. She stopped dead, 7 houses up from her own, staring blankly at nothing. Behind her, Tommy was climbing tearfully back onto his bike, nursing a scraped knee. He yelled something at her, but she ignored it. She had been yelled at by experts. She had been thinking, fall off that bike, kid. Push you off that bike and split your rotten head. And something had happened. Her mind had she groped for a word, had flexed, That was not just right, but it was very close. There had been a curious mental bending, almost like an elbow curling a dumbbell. That wasn't exactly right either, but it was all she could think of. An elbow with no strength, a weak baby muscle. Flex. So she tries to make other things happen from the 7 houses to her house, which is such a weird detail. But anyways, as she's walking to her home, she tries to do other little flexes with her mind. She tries to get shutters to move. She tries to break a window of this neighbor she doesn't like, things like that, but nothing else happens. But even though she couldn't make any of those things happen, when she did reach her house, her mind was kind of like fuzzy. She was getting a headache and she felt really tired. It took a lot of energy out of her. Now we have another excerpt. It's actually, I believe, like a story in like a magazine. So when Carrie was 3, they had next door neighbors. Their last name was Haran, and one of their teenage daughters used to like to sunbathe in the backyard, which is her right. It's their yard. But Margaret didn't like that because she was, her daughter can see that, and she didn't like that Carrietta, 3-year-old Carrie, could see this girl sunbathing. Mind you, she was like in a one piece. Okay? Like it wasn't that deep, But the mom was petty. So she bought her daughter a 2-piece swimsuit and said, "Hey honey, why don't you go and sunbathe with this bathing suit?" So she does, and she plays her music that is very distasteful to Margaret's liking, and she blares it, and all is good in the world. Well, the teenager falls asleep in the backyard while she's sunbathing, and when she wakes up, there's little Carrie staring at her body. I kind of started up awake and tried to smile. It was hard to think what to do. I was loggy from the sun, and my mind felt sticky and slow. I said hi. She was wearing a little yellow dress, sort of cute, but awfully long for a little girl in the summer. It came down to her shins. She didn't smile back. She just pointed and said, "What are those?" I looked down and saw that my top had slipped while I was asleep, so I fixed it and said, "These are my breasts, Carrie." Then she said very solemnly, "I wish I had some." I said, "You have to wait, Carrie. You won't start to get them for another, 8 or 9 years. "No, I won't," she said. "Mama says good girls don't." She looked strange for a little girl, half sad and half self-righteous. I could hardly believe it, and the first thing that popped into my mind also popped right out of my mouth. I said, "Well, I'm a good girl, and doesn't your mother have breasts?" She lowered her head and said something so softly I couldn't hear it. When I asked her to repeat it, she looked at me defiantly and said that her mama had been bad when she made her, and that she was why she had them. She called them dirty pillows, as if it was all one word. So Carrie's already getting brought up a little weird. Okay, we already know it's getting a little strange up in here. Then after their short exchange, Margaret comes out, sees Carrie over there, and starts screaming for Carrie. Like screaming, looking up to the sky, freaking out. And then she starts scraping her fingers down her face and literally starts hurting herself, which of course, 3-year-old Carrie is terrified now. Carrie screamed out, "Mama," and ran to her. Mrs. White kind of squatted like a frog and her arms swooped wide open. I thought she was going to crush her and I screamed. The woman was grinning and drooling right down her chin. Oh, I was sick. Jesus, I was so sick. She gathered her up and they went in. I turned off my radio and I could hear her. Some of the words, but not all. You didn't have to hear all the words to know what was going on. Praying and sobbing and screeching, crazy sounds, and Margaret telling the little girl to get herself in her closet and pray. The little girl crying and screaming that she was sorry. She forgot. Then nothing. And my mother and I just looked at each other. I never saw Mom look so bad, not even when Dad died. She said, "The child," and that was all. We went inside. And that is when the stones start falling from the sky, and every rock boulder that appeared only fell on the Whites' property. We also find out a little tidbit of what happens in there before the rocks fall from Carrie's point of view or something like that. So it's interesting, but we're not there yet. All we know is that we see the rocks fall because we're watching like the neighbors and how they perceived this. And of course, it was such a big nuisance and it's loud and you can literally hear the rocks hitting the house that all the neighbors started to come out and watch the spectacle. And no one thought to call the cops. After a while, probably like 3 minutes, the rocks stopped falling. My mother started to ask me if it was over, and then Margaret screamed. The sound came to us very clearly. In a way, it was worse than before, because there was terror in this one. Then there were clanging, banging sounds as if she was throwing every pot and pan in the house at the girl. So now we're back into the story. Carrie's walking into her house, and luckily she's alone. Her mom works at a godless job at a laundromat, and always mentions how it's godless, and the man she works for is also there's a special place in hell for him, but she says that about like everyone, including her daughter. So when you walk in the house, there are many, many, many paintings, drawings of stories from the Bible. Okay. And I don't mean like, what's it called? The Last Supper was not mentioned. That's the only one I know the name of, but you get my point. It's all like the very tragic ones. And then she says there's a picture of Noah's Ark, which great, that's fine, with the sinners drowning underneath. I don't know what picture you're talking about. I've never seen that picture. I don't want to see that picture. So there's pictures like that chilling, decorating this entire house, including Carrie's bedroom. Okay. And the biggest monstrosity of all lays in another one of their rooms. I mean, there's parts of this story where she says mom was in the altar, mom was in this or whatever, because they do church at home every other day for like 4 hours. Okay. Because Margaret's cray cray. Okay. She needs more socialization or something. Okay. I don't know how she got brought up like this either, because like there's no one's as crazy as her. Like, no, well, maybe her husband who died passed, but like it's really weird. Like really weird. But like I was saying, the room was actually dominated by a huge plaster crucifix on the far wall, fully 4 feet high. Mama had mail ordered it special from St. Louis. The Jesus impaled upon it was frozen in a grotesque, muscle-straining rictus of pain, mouth drawn down into a groaning curve. His crown of thorns bled scarlet streams down temples and forehead. The eyes were turned up in a medieval expression of slanted agony. Both hands were also drenched with blood, and the feet were nailed to a small plaster platform. This corpus had also given Carrie endless nightmares in which the mutilated Christ chased her through dream corridors, holding a mallet and nails, begging her to take up her cross and follow him. Just lately, these dreams had evolved into something less understandable but more sinister. The object did not seem to murder, but something even more awful. Girl, I am with you. I would for sure have nightmares if something like that was hanging in my house. And at 3 years old, that thing is a hell of a lot taller than you are, you know? I was like, ooh. Honestly, when I'm sitting in a church, and I don't not go regularly, but sometimes I will go with my mother-in-law and stuff. But when I'm sitting there, I can't look at the Jesus on the cross, like those statues. I cannot look at them long. I don't know why. It makes me super uneasy. And imagine having that in your house. I don't like that. I'd have nightmares for sure. So while she's in her house and thinking about like what happened that day, you know, she's cramping, she's hurting. You know, it's not great. Her first period is not being the best to her, you know. And while she's going through this, she has like a very poor self-image of herself. I mean, but what do you expect, right? So she's kind of putting herself down, you know, her skin is gross and she's chunky and she's got gross limp hair and she can't wear makeup and she's not allowed to go swimming because the bathing suits are indecent, and all these rules are in place by a mother. Like they have to sew their own clothes. I don't think they have to sew their own clothes. Anyways, that's not here nor there, but Carrie makes her own dresses and she wears them. She doesn't wear jeans, you know, she's only wears skirts, and they're always the other way. Long skirts. Then there's an interesting thing that Carrie says about her mother, saying that she's the only good person she knows in her life and she hates her. So she hates that her mother is the only good thing because she's the only one who is able to fight the black man and, you know, not give in to the evil temptation that the black man represents. So that was interesting. Ogilvy's Dictionary of Psychic Phenomena Telekinesis is the ability to move objects or to cause changes in objects by force of the mind. The phenomenon has most reliably been reported in times of crisis or in stress situations, when automobiles have been levitated from pinned bodies or debris from collapsed buildings, etc. The phenomenon is often confused with the work of poltergeists, which are playful spirits. It should be noted that poltergeists are astral beings of questionable reality, while telekinesis is thought to be an empiric function of the mind, possibly electrochemical in nature. So you're telling me that telekinesis is just like a phenomena thing that happens every once in a blue moon, and then you bring up poltergeists. Have you seen the movie Poltergeist? I don't know about you, but I never once in my life thought that they were what? Playful spirits? Now we're going to go over to Sue Snell, which I hate her name. If anyone should have been made fun of, it was her for her name. Anyways, so Sue Snell is just finishing up sexy time with her boyfriend Tommy in his car. They're at a place where you do those things, right? So after they are done with that, Sue starts thinking about earlier that day, because it's like a Friday night, and that's what happened at school that Friday morning. So Sue starts thinking about it again, and she's like really upset, and she starts crying, and she feels so bad for poor Carrie. But it was like, well, you didn't feel bad. Like the movie, if you've seen the movie, which I have seen, I've done a book versus movie on this. If you want to see that, I can repost that. Okay, again, that's something I deleted from my channel, my midlife crisis. But she didn't care. She was with the other girls, laughing, throwing tampons at poor Carrie, and then went about her day. So all of a sudden, it's the end of the night, and she's with her boyfriend, and she starts thinking about that and starts crying because now she feels bad. Girl, that's a seriously delayed reaction. And then I don't know why, but that snowballs into, it's so hard to be popular, and I'm popular, and Tommy's popular, and we're a great, like, popular couple at the school, and I hate it because there's always the popular couple at every high school, and being popular sucks. I don't want to hear it. I literally do not want to hear any of that crap. And, Tommy's trying to be supportive or whatever. And he's like, I've done bad things in my life too. It happens, this and that. And then he's like, are you going to apologize to her? And then she's like, surprised that he asked her that. And then she's like, well, I don't know. Yeah, you really sound like you feel really bad about what you did. Like, you feel so bad, but you don't want to apologize? Spoiler, she doesn't apologize. She never apologizes for the whole tampon shower debacle. Never apologized for. From Telekinesis, Analysis, and Aftermath, Science Yearbook 1981. There are, of course, still these scientists today, regretfully the Duke University people are in their forefront, who reject the terrifying underlying implications of the Carrie White affair. Like the Flatland Society, the Rosicrucians, or the Corleys of Arizona, who are positive that the atomic bomb does not work, these unfortunates are flying in the fact of logic with their heads in the sand and beg your pardon for the mixed metaphor. Of course, one is able to understand the consternation, the raised voices, the angry letters and arguments at scientific convocations. The idea of telekinesis itself has been a bitter pill for the scientific community to swallow, with its horror movie trappings of Ouija boards and mediums and table wrappings and floating coronets. But understanding will still not excuse scientific irresponsibility. The outcome of the White affair raises grave and difficult questions. An earthquake has struck our ordered notions of the way the natural world is supposed to act and react. Can you blame even such a renowned physicist as Gerald LePonet for claiming the whole thing is a hoax and a fraud, even in the face of such overwhelming evidence as the White Commissions presented? For if Carrie White is the truth, then what of Newton? Again, to summarize that up, is that there's so many people who cannot accept that what happened with Carrie White was her telekinesis ability. They're like, she didn't have that. Like, come up with a different answer. We're not accepting that answer. I feel like I'm jumping around. I'm not jumping around. The book's jumping around. Okay, so now we're back to Carrie when she's at home, and the school called Margaret Carrie's mother to let her know that she went home early that day because she started her period, and, you know, it was a little bit traumatic. So Margaret comes home on her lunch break and stays home for the rest of the day. But she's mad because the only reason Carrie would have her period is if she sinned. So now she is a sinner. She's done something to cause this upon herself. Like, she did this to herself. Okay. Bow your head, Mama said. Let us pray. You should have told me. Mama brought her hand down on the back of Carrie's neck, and behind it was all the heavy muscle developed by 11 years of slinging heavy laundry bags and trucking piles of wet sheets. Carrie's eye-bulging face jerked forward, and her forehead smacked the altar, leaving a mark and making the candles tremble. Let us pray, Mama said softly, implicably. Weeping and snuffling, Carrie bowed her head. A runner of snot hung pendulously from her nose, and she wiped it away. If I had a nickel for every time she made me cry here, with the back of her hand. Oh, Lord, Mama declaimed hugely, her head thrown back. Help the sinning woman beside me here. See the sin of her days and ways. Show her that if she had remained sinless, the curse of blood never would have come on her. She may have committed the sin of lustful thoughts. She may have been listening to rock and roll music on the radio. She may have been tempted by the Antichrist. Show her this is your kind, vengeful hand at work. And no, let me go. She tried to struggle to her feet, and Mama's hand, as strong and pitiless as an iron manacle, forced her back to her knees. And your sign that she must walk the straight and narrow from here on out if she is to avoid the flaming agonies of the eternal pit. Amen. She turned her glittering, magnified eyes upon her daughter. Go to your closet now. No. She felt her breath go thick with terror. Go to your closet, pray in secret, ask for forgiveness for your sin. That's Margaret White. That's Carrie's mom. All the time, like all day for hours on end. That's her mom. Now, this closet has this freaky black man on a throne and like sinners. Like, these are all figurines with this weird like neon light, and that is in the closet. The closet is like, you know, Harry Potter's place, like underneath the stairs. So it's like a little cubby. I shouldn't even say it's that. It is in the movie, and now I always envision it under stairs like that. But anyways, but it's a closet, so I guess it's not. Anyways, I'm getting way off base here. So it's creepy, and she's always locked in there all the time. Even in the beginning when we heard about the Stones story, and they were hearing Margaret yelling at Carrie when Carrie was 3 to like go to your closet and pray. So this is something Margaret uses all the time on Carrie and locks her in there for like 6-7 hours at a time. So after all of that is said, and now we know what the creepy ass closet looks like, Carrie threatens to make the Stones come again. Margaret's scared now, and she calls her the spawn of the devil. Not, you know, anything crazy. I mean, that's crazy, but like, it's not crazy for Margaret. She calls her that all the time, especially as the story progresses. So she still manages to get Carrie in the closet, locks her up there for 6 or 7 hours. And then when she finally lets her out later that night, Carrie is on her sewing machine. She's sewing like some sleeves onto the dress. It looks terrible. And Margaret is tatting doilies. I have no idea what tatting means, like tatting. I don't know what that means. But doilies, that's an old ass thing. That's old school thing. Unless if I'm confused at what doilies are. I mean, I could be in the wrong too, but I don't understand what tatting means. So she finishes the dress. She thinks it looks hideous as always. And then she goes, hey, Mom, is it okay if I go to sleep or go to bed? And she's like, yes. And then Carrie stands up. She looks back at her sewing machine, and she makes the wheel spin a couple times. And her mom looks at it in horror, and Carrie's like, oh, only cleaning the thread. And then her mom's like, go to bed. Like, blah, blah, blah. She's like all like mad and crazy about it. So Carrie's starting to flex her power, and she's getting a good handle on her powers already, like day one. So we love that for her, because I'm on Team Carrie all the way. You cannot make me sway from Carrie from the shadow exploded. Margaret White was born and raised in Mutton, a small town which borders Chamberlain, and sends its tuition students to Chamberlain's junior and senior high schools. Her parents were fairly well-to-do. They owned a prosperous night spot just outside the Mutton town limits called the Jolly Roadhouse. Margaret's father, John Brigham, was killed in a barroom shooting incident in the summer of 1959. Margaret Brigham who was then almost 30, began attending fundamentalist prayer meetings. Her mother had become involved with a new man, Harold Allison, whom she later married, and they both wanted Margaret out of the house. She believed her mother, Judith, and Harold Allison were living in sin and made her views known frequently. Judith Brigham expected her daughter to remain a spinster the rest of her life. In the more pungent phraseology of her soon-to-be stepfather, Margaret had a face like the ass end of a gasoline truck and a body to match. He also referred to her as a little praying Jesus. Margaret refused to leave until 1960 when she met Ralph White at a revival meeting. In September of that year, she left the Brigham residence in Mutton and moved to a small flat in Chamberlain Center. The courtship of Margaret Brigham and Ralph White terminated in marriage on March 23, 1962. On April 3, 1962, Margaret White was admitted briefly to Westover Doctors Hospital. Nope, she wouldn't tell us what was wrong, Harold Allison said. The one time we went to see her, she told us we were living in adultery, even though we were hitched and we were going to hell. She said God had put an invisible mark on our foreheads, but she could see it. Acted crazy as a bat in a hen house, she did. Her mom tried to be nice, tried to find out what the matter was with her. She got hysterical and started to rave about an angel with a sword who would walk through the parking lots of roadhouses and cut down the wicked. We left. Judith Allison, however, had at least an idea of what might have been wrong with her daughter. She thought that Margaret had gone through a miscarriage. If so, the baby was conceived out of wedlock. Confirmation of this would shed an interesting light on the character of Carrie's mother. In a long and rather hysterical letter to her mother dated August 19th, 1962, Margaret said that she and Ralph were living sinlessly without the curse of intercourse. She urged Harold and Judith Allison to close their abode of wickedness and do likewise. It is, Margaret declares near the end of her letter, the only sick way you and that man can avoid the rain of blood yet to come. Ralph and I, like Mary and Joseph, will neither know or pollute sick each other's flesh. If there's an issue, let it be divine. Of course, the calendar tells us that Carrie was conceived later that same year. All right, we're back to Monday morning. School's in session. Carrie doesn't go to school at all this week, but first thing Monday morning, Desjardins pulls aside all the mean girls, Chris, Sue, other ones I didn't bother or care to remember because they really don't matter in this story. And she says, what did she say? It went to like the issue didn't just end at the principals. It went to like the higher ups. What's past that? Those guys, and they were all dudes. So they didn't understand the severity because it involved periods. Like they just didn't see the big deal with it. So they said that they have a week's suspension. Desjardins doesn't think that is good enough. She said she wanted 3 days suspension and to get their prom taken away from them. So 1 week suspension, but your suspension will be spent with me, says gym teacher. And she's like, and I'm going to run you guys ragged. And then Chris is like, well, fine, I just won't go. She's like, if you do not come to your 1 week detention sessions, then you will have 3 days suspension and you are not allowed to go to prom. So, compromise. Desjardins also kind of throws Chris against the lockers because Chris is being a brat and like, my dad's a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. And Desjardins like, I don't give a like, get in line, get with the program. So Chris is pissed. She's like, she can't get away with this, blah, blah, blah. And, guess who skips the week detention? Chris. So after Chris's hissy fit, a couple weeks later, maybe not that long, like I said, the whole this thing jumps back and forth a little bit, so I'm not sure, but Chris's father eventually shows up to talk to the principal and vice principal, because he's pissed, and he does try to pay and get his daughter out of a lot of things all the time. So he comes in and he's like, my daughter will serve her suspension, she'll stay home the next 2 days, but she will go to prom. After all, prom's a very important milestone, blah, blah. It's really not. I went to prom and I didn't want to. I should have just stayed home. my dog also died that day because of prom, but we're not going to get into that. So my prom sucked. So the principals are like, no, she's not going to prom. Like, she's suspended and she's not allowed to go to the prom. And they were like, he's like, I will sue you guys because your teacher decided to lay hands on my daughter, blah, blah, blah. You can't do that, this and that. And they were like, well, then we're going to counter sue for Carrie White because your daughter literally abused this child going through a very traumatic experience. And like, I can't say it that well, but their whole argument was actually very well said. And the principals actually really gave it to the lawyer because Chris's dad, he left fucking pissed. He was fuming because he just realized that he lost. His daughter was not going to go to prom. She still had her suspension. And the principals also brought up like all the shitty stuff that her daughter did. And like how she's always bailing out of detentions and this and that. Like, she's just like not a great student. Okay. She just pays her way through life. So Sue, outside of school, runs into Chris and her bad boy boyfriend, Billy, at, some kind of like local hangout that the kids have. And Chris is basically bitching about Carrie. She's really pissed off that, she can't go to prom because of her. And, she's going to pay her back. Like, she's going to get her back for it. And then Sue's like, well, what we did was pretty shitty. And then Chris was just like, you're a hypocrite. And then, of course, Sue gets through all this guilt again because she is a hypocrite and popular. And then she goes into like the whole popular thing again, which is like, what girl? Drop it. No one cares. No one cares that you're popular. Okay? No one cares. Anywho, so when she's all guilty about being a hypocrite that Chris called her, she runs away. And then Sue just thinks to herself like, oh my God, she's going to end up with someone like Tommy and have 2 kids and be like a suburban wife. And she can't fathom the horrors of that kind of life. Meanwhile, back in Carrie's world, she's practicing her flexing and she is doing a phenomenal job. She can lift objects like brushes and things like that in her room, and then she's actually able to lift her bed 3 inches off the ground before it slams back down on the ground. Margaret doesn't say nothing because she's scared as shit that her daughter is getting all these, like, she's strengthening her powers basically. So go, Carrie. We are excited that you're getting stronger. I mean, we don't know what it's amounting to at this point, but like, good for you. Go you, Carrie, because man, I feel for her so much. From My Name is Susan Snell by Susan Snell. There's one thing no one has understood about what happened in Chamberlain on prom night. The press hasn't understood it. The scientists at Duke University haven't understood it. David Congress hasn't understood it. Although his The Shadow Exploded is probably the only half-decent book written on the subject, and certainly the White Commission, which used me as a handy scapegoat, did not understand it. This one thing is the most fundamental fact. We were kids. Carrie was 17. Chris Hargensen was 17. I was 17. Tommy Ross was 18. Billy Nolan, who spent a year repeating the 9th grade, presumably, before he learned how to shoot his cuffs during examinations, was 19. Again, Billy is Chris's boyfriend and Tommy was Sue's boyfriend. Older kids react in more sociably acceptable ways than younger kids, but they still have a way of making bad decisions, of overreacting, of underestimating. In the first section, which follows this introduction, I must show these tendencies in myself as well as I am able. Yet the matter which I am going to discuss is at the root of my involvement in prom night, and if I am to clear my name, I must begin by recalling scenes which I find particularly painful. I have told this story before, most notoriously before the White Commission, which received it with incredulity. In the wake of 200 deaths and the destruction of an entire town, it's so easy to forget one thing. We were kids. We were kids. We were kids trying to do our best. Trying to do your best? Maybe not. Like, again, Sue's got all this weird pent-up hypocrisy and, just guilt around Carrie, and she doesn't apologize. And then even through this, she kind of seems a little blasé about things that continue to happen. I don't know. I don't really like Sue. From My Name is Susan Snell. There are lots of people, mostly men, who aren't surprised that I asked Tommy to take Carrie to the spring ball. They are surprised that he did it, though, which shows you that the male mind expects very little in the way of altruism from its fellows. Tommy took her because he loved me and because it was what I wanted. How, asked the skeptic from the balcony, did you know he loved you? Because he told me so, mister. And if you'd known him, that would have been good enough for you, too. Now you know. Sue asked Tommy to take Carrie to prom. And he's like, are you kidding me? Like, she would never go for that. She's not going to say yes. And I wanted to take you to prom. And, like, he did. He, like, formally asked her and she, like, accepted. So the reasoning Sue wants Tommy to take Carrie to prom is to help her get out of her shell and be more sociable and not be the scapegoat, not be the butt of jokes for once, just be like a normal girl enjoying her prom, which it works to an extent, but it wouldn't work like that in real life. Like, Carrie has a totally different personality at prom, which is it's good, and she's like confident in herself and she's enjoying herself, but like that wouldn't necessarily really happen. If someone was as isolated as Carrie, she would be on the defense the entire, I was saying, did I mean defense or offense? She would be on the defense the entire time. And that doesn't just go away in one night because some people are being nice to you. You know what I mean? But we're not going to, we're not changing the story. It's just, I thought that was like her reasoning, and her reasoning sucks. It doesn't make any damn sense. Anywho, Tommy agrees to it. And then on Thursday after lunch, Tommy goes to ask Carrie to prom, and he's like nervous. Like he feels like he's afraid of the rejection, I guess. I don't know, but he's like super nervous to ask her. So when he asks her to prom, she's like, what? And he asks again. Like, she's in such disbelief. I believe she makes him ask her like 3 different times, and she responds with, I don't like to be tricked, she said softly, lowering her head. She hesitated for just a second and then passed him by. She stopped and turned, and he suddenly saw dignity on her, something so natural that he doubted if she was even aware of it. Do you people think you can just go on tricking me forever? I know who you go around with. I don't go around with anyone I don't want to, Tommy said patiently. I'm asking you because I want to ask you. Ultimately, he knew that this to be the truth. If Sue was making a gesture of atonement, she was doing it only at second hand. The period 6 students were coming in now, and some of them were looking over curiously. Dale Ullman said something to a boy Tommy didn't know, and both of them snickered. Come on, Tommy said. They walked out into the hall. They were halfway to Wing 4. His class was the other way, walking together, perhaps only by accident, but when she said, almost too quietly to hear, I'd love to. He was perceptive enough to know that it was not an acceptance, and again, doubt assailed him. Still, it was started. Do it then. It will be all right for both of us. We'll see to it. No, she said, and in her sudden pensiveness she could have been mistaken for beautiful. It will be a nightmare. I don't have tickets, he said, as if he hadn't heard her. This is the last day they saw them. Hey, Tommy, you're going the wrong way, Brent Gillian yelled. She stopped. You're going to be late. Will you? Your class, she said, distraught. Your class, the bell's going to ring. Will you? Yes, she said with angry helplessness. You know I would. She swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. No, he said, but now I do. I'll pick you up at 7:30. Fine, she whispered. Thank you. She looked as if she might swoon, and then, more uncertain than ever, he touched her hand. Here's the thing. Carrie sounds very confident when she talks. I know they're saying, oh, she's this, and she's like, oh, and she does this stupid stuff. But, when you hear this conversation, it doesn't sound like someone who is socially awkward or someone who has problems speaking with people. But she does, So this part is where, remember I told you that there's something that happens before the stones fall? This is that part. So Carrie convinces herself that she is not afraid of her. Speaking of her mother, she's not afraid of her. She's not afraid of her. She's got this. So she goes to a store and she buys this beautiful velvet fabric so she can make a beautiful prom dress for herself, right? And she goes home. She has it hidden away in the basement or something, but she's trying to get the nerve to tell her mom about this. So her mom calls her to supper, and this is where she wants to tell her mom she's going to prom. But before that, we're kind of thinking about when the day the stones fell. That's another infamous day in the story. Oh, also Carrie has full control over her powers, full control. She is ready to go. She's locked and loaded, okay? So her mother had Ralph's butcher knife in her hand. She was going to kill Carrie. 3-year-old Carrie. She's talking about ripping her eyes out or something. Anyways, so Carrie made the stones fall because she's in distress. Her mother is going to kill her. But when the stones fell, it kind of paused and stopped Margaret from advancing. And then once the stones stopped and they heard all that clashing and banging, that was Carrie using her mind to throw furniture and things at her mother. So, like, we think it was like Margaret going crazy on her daughter, but it ended up being the other way around. And it was Carrie trying to defend herself from her mother so she could live. Like, dude, like, that's so insane. So now they're at supper. Carrie finally tells her mom, well, first she's like, you didn't eat the blueberry pie. And Carrie's like, it makes me break out. I don't want it. And she's like, you're going to eat the blueberry pie, because she's crazy, right? And Carrie's like, I'm not doing that. By the way, I've been asked to prom. No. And I'm going to go. No. So her mom keeps saying no. And she's trying to explain to her, I'm going to prom. I'll be back by 11:30. A boy asked me and all this other stuff. Her mom is literally losing her ever-loving mind over it. She's like, no, this can't happen, blah, 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 blah. And then Margaret starts yelling, God, like he literally is going to walk in and like help. She tells Carrie to go in the closet and pray. This is old news at time. And this time Carrie's like, no. And she's like standing her ground. This is like the first time ever. She's really, aside from like what I just explained when she was 3, she didn't really know what she was fully doing. But in this moment, she's like consciously 100% herself saying, no, I will not get in that closet and I will not do that. She throws the blueberry pie across the room, and then she takes Margaret's teacup and smashes it above the stove without moving from her seat, with her powers, right? So then she calmly gets up, grabs her nice velvety fabric from the bathroom, from the basement, and starts sewing her prom dress. Mom starts yelling, devil child, Satan spawn, witch. Carrie's like, I don't care. I'm going to keep doing me. From My Name is Susan Snell. They finally even made a movie about it. I saw it last April when I came out. I was sick. Whenever anything important happens in America, they have to gold plate it like baby shoes. That way you can forget it. And forgetting Carrie White may be a bigger mistake than anyone realizes. True. Why do we have to do that shit? Why do we have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Romanticize terrible people and terrible events. Jeffrey Dahmer's a great example. Why? Why do we love him? We don't. We shouldn't. But the guy got like love letters all the time in prison, and there are other prisoners who did terrible things who get love letters and women wanting to be with them, and like they'll kill you too. There's nothing special about anyone they took, and they will just do the same shit to you. I don't understand it. Why do we do that? Why? They ain't shit. Okay, I don't want to get on that tangent because I could literally go about that for hours. With the TK phenomenon, the male appears to be the carrier. The TK gene may be recessive in the female, but dominates only in the female. It appears that Ralph White carried the gene. Margaret Brigham, by purest chance, also carried the outlaw gene sign, but we may be fairly confident that it was recessive, as no information has ever been found to indicate that she had telekinetic powers resembling her daughter's. Investigations are now being conducted into the life of Margaret Brigham's grandmother, Sadie Cochran. For if the dominant/recessive pattern obtains with TK as it does with hemophilia, Mrs. Cochran may have been TK dominant. I'm going to spoil that for you right now. She is. Sadie Cochran also was a telekinetic, telekinetic lady. Anyways, I wish we knew more about her. So all of Sue's friends are like up in arms and want to know what the deal is with Tommy bringing Carrie to prom, because everyone knows now. Everyone knows that she's not going to prom. Or like she still could, but she just decides not to because she doesn't have a date anymore, which I'm like, okay. But so she's not going to go to prom. That's like her being like, oh, that's my punishment. I'm just making that decision for myself that I'm not going to go to prom. Tommy can go with Carrie and she can have a really good time and be out of her shell, blah, blah, blah. We've heard it all before, right? But it also looks like Chris is up to something. Chris snuck into one of the teacher's offices and she was able to see the ballots for the king and queen nominees, and Carrie and Tommy are one of the couples. on that list. And she also got the floor plan of the prom, because we already know, but this is what Chris is doing behind the scenes, right? From My Name is Susan Snell. I can understand some of what must have led up to the prom. Awful as it was, I can understand how someone like Billy Nolan could go along, for instance. Chris Hargensen led him by the nose at least most of the time. His friends were just as easily led by Billy himself. Kenny Garson, who dropped out of high school when he was 18, had a tested third grade reading level. In the clinical sense, Steve Deegan was little more than an idiot. Some of the others had police records. One of them, Jackie Talbot, was first busted at the age of 9 for stealing hubcaps. If you got a social worker mentality, you can even regard these people as unfortunate victims. But what can you say for Chris Hargensen herself? It seems to me that from first to last, her one and only objective in view was the complete and total destruction of Carrie White. And I agree. The bitch was hateful. And like they explained, she was rich. She had money. And she was like infatuated with Billy. Like, they are so toxic throughout this whole thing. It's a little unnerving. From The Shadow Exploded. One wonders just how much planning went into the ruination of Carrie White. Was it a carefully made plan, rehearsed and gone over many times, or just something that happened in a bumbling sort of way? I favor the latter idea. I suspect that Christine Hargensen was the brains of the affair, but that she herself had only the most nebulous of ideas on how one might get a girl like Carrie. I rather suspect it was she who suggested that William Nolan and his friends make the trip to Irwin Henty's farm in North Chamberlain. The thought of that trip's imagined result would have appealed to a warped sense of poetic justice, I am sure. So Billy and his buddies go to this guy's farm to slaughter the pigs. He has 2 steel buckets for the blood. And there's a line that Billy's like, oh my God, this is so perfect. Like, pig's blood for a pig. It's like, okay, dude, but really? Okay, we finally reached part 2, called Prom Night. From The Shadow Exploded. Before turning to a more detailed analysis of prom night itself, it might be well to sum up what we know about Carrie White the person. We know that Carrie was the victim of her mother's religious mania. We know that she possessed a latent telekinetic talent, commonly referred to as TK. We know that this so-called wild talent is really a hereditary trait produced by a gene that is usually recessive, if present at all. We suspect that the TK ability may be glandular in nature. We know that Carrie produced at least one demonstration of her ability as a small girl when she was put in an extreme situation of guilt and stress. We know that a second extreme situation of guilt and stress arose from a shower room hazing incident. It had been theorized, especially by William G. Throneberry and Julia Givens Berkeley, that resurgence of the TK ability at this point was caused by both psychological factors, i.e. the reaction of other girls and Carrie herself for their first menstrual period, and psychological factors, i.e. the advent of puberty. And finally, we know that on prom night, a third stress situation arose, causing the terrible events which we now must begin to discuss. We will begin with, now they're starting to look at this because the scientists all said it was like not possible, this and that. And now they're like, oh, this is a gene. This is a trait. This is something we can actually trace in people. So they're starting to come around to the idea that, telekinesis is a real thing. So Carrie is a nervous wreck waiting for Tommy to pick her up. And he's 3 minutes late. And in those 3 minutes that he was late, she was like, I'm going to tear this house down. I am going to just wreck it to shreds. Like, she was going out of her mind. She was like picking up things in the house and shiftlessly waiting for Tommy. Like 3 minutes late, like, girl, chill. I mean, I get it, but that was a little extreme, even for a teenager. And her mom the whole time is up in the altar praying for her to change her mind, I guess. I don't know, but she's doing a lot of praying. When she opens the door for Tommy, he says how beautiful she is, and they head off to prom. From The Shadow Exploded. While those going to the Ewin Spring Ball were gathering at the high school or just leaving pre-prom buffets, Christine Hargensen and William Nolan had met in a room above a local town limits tavern called The Cavalier. We know that they had been meeting there for some time. That is in the records of the White Commission. What we don't know is whether their plans were complete and irrevocable. irrevocable. Is that right? I feel like I'm not saying that word right. Or if they went ahead almost on whim. So what we know is that this was very planned out. Nothing about what Chris and Billy were doing was on a whim. Earlier, the day of prom, not Nolan, that's his last name. Billy had the buckets of blood too, and they were frozen. So he went into the school, he got the buckets all set up and good to go for prom that night because he knew it thought out and he would be fine. So they planned ahead. Like they had everything good to go. So Chris is waiting to continue their plans and thinks about why she even likes Billy. Because he's an ass. Okay, the only thing she finds attractive about him is that he's got like this bad boy image and he doesn't give a shit. He's also forced himself on her. He likes the idea of beating her around. What? Because he's like, oh my God, she's a goddess. And then at the pig's blood thing, he's like, I would do anything for Chris. That's why he did all that. And like, he is just infatuated with her and she's great and this and that. And like, she's all for him. And then later he's like, this shit is over between us. Like, as soon as this prank goes off, like, we're done. You know, and I like the fact that I can beat her around. I don't know. It's weird. Okay? Toxic. That Chris and Billy, if you read this book, if you've seen the movie, it is toxic. Do not strive for that kind of relationship. Please, for the love of God. From My Name is Susan Snell. You know, I'm not as sorry about all of it as people seem to think I should be. Not that they say it right out. They're the ones who always say how dreadfully sorry they are. That's usually just before they ask for my autograph. But they expect you to be sorry. They expect you to get weepy, to wear a lot of black, to drink a little too much or take drugs. They say things like, oh, it's such a shame. But you know what happened to her? And blah, blah, blah. But sorry is the Kool-Aid in human emotions. It's what you say when you spill a cup of coffee or throw a gutter ball when you're bowling with the girls in the league. True sorrow is as rare as true love. I'm not sorry that Tommy is dead anymore. He seems too much like a daydream I once had. You probably think that's cruel, but there's been a lot of water under the bridge since prom night. And I'm not sorry for my appearance before the White Commission. I told the truth as much as I knew it. But I am sorry for Carrie. They've forgotten her, you know. They've made her into some kind of a symbol and forgotten that she was a human being, as real as you reading this, with hopes and dreams and blah, blah, blah. Useless to tell you that, I suppose. Nothing can change her back now from something made out of newsprint into a person. But she was, and she hurt. Most than any of us probably know, she hurt. And so I'm sorry, and I hope it was good for her, that prom, until the terror began. I hope it was good and fine and wonderful and magic. So she's sorry for her. She's not sorry to her. Again, like I think she does say in the very end. But we're not there yet. And all I'm saying is that she's sorry about the situation. She's sorry about what she did. But she never comes out and just says, Carrie, you know what? I'm sorry. So when Tommy and Carrie arrive at prom, they see one of Tommy's buddies right outside the building and they start like fun wrestling. But Carrie doesn't know if it's fun wrestling or not. And she's like literally a second away from blasting the him. But then she's like, oh, this is play fighting. Okay, that's what they're doing. Don't let it bother you, Frida said, tilting her letter opener nose and strolling over. If they kill each other, I'll dance with you. They look too stupid to kill, Carrie ventured, like dinosaurs. And when Frida grinned, she felt something very old and rusty loosening inside her. A warmth came with it. Relief. Ease. Where'd you buy your dress? Frida asked. I love it. I made it. Made it? Frida's eyes opened in unaffected surprise. No shit. Carrie felt herself blushing furiously. Yes, I did. I like to sew. I got the material at John's in Westover. The pattern is really quite easy. So she's chatting. She's trying to let herself enjoy the moment. From the shadows exploded. The White Commission stand on the trigger of the whole affair. 2 buckets of pig blood on a beam over the stage seems to be overly weak and vacillating, even in the light of the scant concrete proof. If one chooses to believe the hearsay evidence of Nolan's immediate circle of friends, and to be brutally frank, they do not seem intelligent enough to lie convincingly, then Nolan took this part of the conspiracy entirely out of Christine Hargenson's hands and acted on his own initiative. I already explained it. He went himself to set up the prank because he said, like, you can't trust anyone. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. You know, one of those kind of self-talk. From My Name is Susan Snell. Carrie went to see Tommy the day before prom. She was waiting outside one of his classes, and he said she looked really wretched, as if she thought he'd yell at her to stop hanging around and stop bugging him. She said she had to be in by 11:30 at the latest, or her mama would be worried. She said she wasn't going to spoil his time or anything, but it wouldn't be fair to worry her mama. Tommy suggested they stop at the Kelly Fruit after and grab a root beer and a burger. All the other kids would be going to Westover or Lewiston, and they would have the place to themselves. Carrie's face lit up, he said. She told him that would be fine, just fine. This is the girl they keep calling a monster. I want you to keep that firm in your mind. The girl who could be satisfied with a hamburger and a dime root beer after her only school dance, so her mama wouldn't be worried. So Carrie is really starting to feel normal, which was the whole point. She wanted to feel like a normal girl going to her school prom, and people were being nice to her, not overly so, because let's be real, you can't put a switch like that. But she wasn't being picked on in any way. From the Shadow Exploded. Perhaps a complete study of Carrie's mother will be undertaken someday, when the subject of Carrie herself becomes more academic. I myself might attempt it, if only to gain access to the Brigham family tree. It might be extremely interesting to know what odd occurrences one might come across 2 or 3 generations back. And there is, of course, the knowledge that Carrie went home on prom night. Why? It's hard to tell just how sane Carrie's motives were by that time. She may have gone for absolution and forgiveness, or she may have gone for the express purpose of committing matricide. In any event, the physical evidence seems to indicate that Margaret White was waiting for her. Now back home, Margaret she's pacing. Something has to be done. She cannot let this devil child keep doing what she's doing. It needs to be stopped. And tonight's the night. Margaret White walked slowly from her bedroom into the living room. First had come the flow of blood and the filthy fantasies the devil sent with it. Then this hellish power the devil had given to her. It came at the time of the blood and the time of the hair on the body, of course. Oh, she knew the devil's power. Her own grandmother had it. She had been able to light the fireplace without even stirring from her rocker by the window. That's when we find out that Carrie's grandmother also had this power. So her grandmother died from a heart attack at the age of 66. 4 weeks after the funeral, Carrie had a toy or a pacifier or something dangling above her head in thin air. And that moment, Margaret was going to kill her. This is where it says Ralph stopped her. But Ralph's supposed to be dead already, okay? And then there was a second time she tried to kill her again, and that is when she was what was the words? Carrie was 3, looking in sin at the devil's slut in the next yard over. But the stones had happened and weakened her resolve. So Margaret grabbed a long carving knife, went to the kitchen and grabbed a wedding stone and started sharpening the knife. So Tommy keeps asking Carrie if she'd like to dance, and she keeps saying, no, I just kind of want to sit for a little bit, because she doesn't know how to dance and she's too embarrassed to tell him. So after the 3rd time, she's like, okay, I don't know how to dance. And he's like, you know what? I don't even like dancing. So they don't dance. But they do decide to mingle. And while Tommy goes off to get him some punch, Desjardins comes up. She's a chaperone at the prom. And she's basically just talks to Carrie. She's like, you look so beautiful. Carrie's like, you're full of shit. And then they kind of just have a talk. Desjardins kind of talks about how prom is a very special night. And she's like, my prom night wasn't anything special, but I felt like it was special, and that don't take it for granted kind of thing. And then she leaves. When Tommy comes back, he's like, what's that about? And she's like, I think she was trying to say she's sorry. Which, okay, but you don't really believe her either, because what happens after, but whatever. We're just going to accept the fact that Desjardins, the weird gym teacher's trying to apologize, even though she doesn't come out and say it, because no one could just come out and say, hey, Carrie, you know what? I'm really sorry what we did to you. No one says that. So Sue's at home hemming a dress, and because she's not going to prom, and she has all these thoughts about Tommy and Carrie, and she's jealous, but then there's all these other emotions swirling through her, and then she's like, oh, maybe he'll fall in love with her. Why don't you just break up your boyfriend if you don't want to be with your boyfriend? And then she's like, oh, my period's late too. Am I pregnant? Which that does not get brought up again now that I'm thinking about it. I don't think. Anywho, Her period's late, and she's always been pretty regular late. Oh, her period happens at the very end. So it was answered, but not in so many words. Anyways, so she's like, I've been very regular. I don't have my period. That could be a bad sign. Like her nightmare of having the perfect husband and the kids in the suburbs and stuff she doesn't want it. So now I'd say this is like an hour into the dance, and Carrie finds out that her and Tommy's name are on the ballot for king and queen. And she's like freaking out, and she's like, oh my God, who should we vote for? And then Tommy's like, who gives a shit? Like, let's vote for us. Like, let's vote for ourselves. So they laugh about it and they joke and they do that. And then after, Carrie gets this really bad feeling. She has just this gut feeling that they shouldn't have done that kind of thing. And then when they grab all the ballots and they count it and this and that, this is the first time in like the school history that there is a tie. So now everyone has to vote again for either Tommy and Carrie, because they were the ones who tied, with Frank and Jessica. They're just randos. We have no idea who Frank and Jessica are. So Chris and Billy are in position and they are waiting. Chris is getting super impatient. Billy tells her to shut the hell up. And we are 7 minutes of 10. So once they go through voting again, Carrie tells Tommy, like, don't vote for us again. And he's like, why not? And she can't really explain it, but it's her gut feeling, like something bad is going to happen. So she doesn't really explain that to him. She's just like, just don't, please. And he doesn't listen to her. And he puts their name down anyways, which, bitch, what the are you doing? Like, can you not respect her, like, at all? Like, could you just be like, okay, you don't want me to do that. You can't explain it. Like, show some understanding. Like, you wanted to win, King. Like, there's no other reason why you would just not accept her wishes and be like, okay, like, really? And then because he always says, like, when you win, you just stand up there, like, and you look like idiots. And then they take your picture for the yearbook to look like an idiot. Like, so what the dude? What the And guess who wins? Tommy and Carrie by one vote. His stupid ass vote. So as Margaret's back home with the wedding stone, sharpening her knife, she accidentally slips and she ends up cutting a huge gash in her hand. And then she smears the blood all over the knife and then keeps sharpening it. Ew. If thine right eye offend thee, pluck it out. So Sue's at home and she feels like the world is about to end. It's 12 after 10. So Tommy and Carrie win by that one vote, which I already said. And the applause fills the space. Carrie gasps and Tommy like feels this pull towards Carrie, and in his head it's just like chanting Carrie, Carrie, Carrie. And like this happens to a lot of people like throughout this part to the end. And I don't know what Carrie's doing exactly, but people are gravitating towards her, and she's subconsciously doing it because there's like things that happen and they're like, how'd you know it was Carrie? How did you know she was the one doing it? And they're just like, I don't know, I just know. It's because she kind of like unconsciously was like giving that information to people without knowing it. Anywho, so they're ushered up into stage. They're in positions. They are standing right in front of their thrones. There's like thrones put on the stage for them. And then the school band starts to play the school song, which is Billy and Chris's signal to let the pails drop. So, and this is Chris. A sudden smothered sound that might have been a half scream came from her mouth, and she leaned forward and pulled violently on the cord with both hands. It came loose with slack for a moment, making her think that Billy had been having her on all this time, that the rope was attached to nothing but thin air. Then it snubbed tight, held for a second, and then came through her palms harshly, leaving a thin burn. She began. The music inside came to a jangling, discordant halt. For a moment, ragged voices continued, oblivious, and then they stopped. There was a beat of silence, and then someone screamed. Silence again. They stared at each other in the dark, frozen by the actual act as thought never could have done. Her very breath turned to glass in her throat. Then, inside, the laughter began. Which is so sad for Carrie. And then we find out that the scream, I don't know if I wrote it all down, so I'm just going to tell you now. But that scream was, a girl was standing next to her, and she's like, that's blood. And then that made that girl scream, realizing she was like saying the truth, like that is blood. So she screams, and then people start laughing, but it's not a good laugh. It's like, if I don't laugh, like I'm going to crack, my brain's going to go poof. Oh, and I forgot to mention that when Tommy and her are getting their crowns and stuff, Tommy thinks, I love Carrie and Sue. Like, bitch, you just met her. You don't love Carrie. You don't even know her. Anyways, whatever. So that happens right before they get the pig's blood dropped onto them. So Sue, now we're back to Sue, is making her hot chocolate when she hears the town alarm blaring. And the only time that ever happens, aside from like Sunday morning or something, they like test it, but the only reason that town alarm would be going off now is because they're in a state of emergency of some sort. So Sue looks outside, and then she sees that the school is on fire. So she runs to get her coat and her shoes, and as she does, a boom shakes the town, like the first big boom. From We Survived the Black Prom by Norma Watson. They were drenched. Carrie got the worst. She looked exactly like she had been dipped in a bucket of red paint. She just sat there. She never moved. The band that was closest to the stage, Josie and the Moon Glows, got splattered. The lead guitarist had a white instrument and it splattered all over it. I said, my God, that's blood. When I said that, Tina screamed. It was very loud and it rang out clearly in the auditorium. People had stopped singing and everything was completely quiet. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. I looked up and there were 2 buckets dangling high over the thrones, swinging and banging together. They were still dripping. All of a sudden, they fell, with a lot of loose string paying out behind them. One of them hit Tommy Ross on the head. It made a very loud noise, like a gong. That made someone laugh, and I don't know who it was, but it wasn't the way a person laughs when they see something funny and gay. It was raw and hysterical and awful. At the same instant, Carrie opened her eyes wide. That was when they all started laughing. I did too. God help me. It was so weird. Miss Desjardins came running over to her, and she wasn't laughing anymore. Meaning the gym teacher was laughing at her. She was holding out her arms to her, but then she veered off and hit the wall beside the stage. It was the strangest thing. She didn't stumble or anything. It was as if someone had pushed her, but there was no one there. Carrie ran through the crowd with her hands clutching her face, and somebody put his foot out. I don't know who it was, but she went sprawling on her face, leaving a long red streak on the floor. She just said, oof. I remember that. It made me laugh even harder, hearing Carrie say oof like that. She started to crawl along the floor, and then she got up and ran out. She ran right past me. You could smell the blood. It smelled like something sick and rotted. She went down the stairs 2 at a time, and then out the doors, and she was gone. Thought that went a little differently, didn't you? I mean, shitty, by the way, super shitty. But this is where the story definitely veers off of what the movie was, which, I love the book version of this. If you were expecting her to stay through the whole shebang, it's a little different. It's not exactly as the movie puts it. So the kids finally start calming down through the laughter, and then shock fades away. And now people are starting to cry, and now people are like, what the actual fuck just happened? Someone yells, call a doctor, because Tommy is unresponsive. Like, Tommy's dead already. Okay, like that pail hit him just right and fucked him up, so he's already dead. Desjardins is okay, but she's obviously a little like loopy because she got slammed into a wall, and they start freaking out. And then someone's like, Carrie's back. And it was because Carrie went outside and she basically was in the grass crying, sobbing, not knowing what to do. And then she's like, no, this. And she's like, it's time for revenge, right? So she goes back and she's outside of the lobby and she shuts all the lobby doors and she can see them through the window, right? Because as soon as the doosh, like the big bang of all those doors closing, then they start freaking out and they all stampede towards the door and they're crushing the people who are right at the door because they're all trying to push it out, and these doors are not budging because Carrie's got it on lockdown with her brain, right? And then as she watches them, she turns the sprinklers on, and then there's a guy named Josie or Jackie. I don't know. I thought it was a girl this whole time. Then I realized that it was not. It was a guy. Josie. Okay. So then Josie, he's the one who's like he's the one who yelled for a doctor because Tommy's unresponsive. And then he was like, talking to his bandmates who weren't there anymore, like, unplug the amp, unplug the mics, right? But his band members are not there anymore. The sprinklers are going. The floor is getting wet. So he runs down there and he tries to start unplugging the amps and the mics. So guess what happened to poor Josie? He got electrocuted. He was frying, basically, and then his shirt caught on fire when he slumped over the amp after being electrocuted. Yeah, bad news bears. Unfortunately, that was not great. So everyone is seeing this as well, and everyone is getting wet, and then Carrie rips all the cables and the wires out, and they're all like writhing around like snakes, you know? From the New England AP ticker, 10:46 p.m., Chamberlain, Maine, AP. A fire is raging out of control at Ewin Consolidated High School at this time. A school dance was in progress at the time of the outbreak, which is believed to have been electrical in origin. Witnesses say that the school sprinkler system went on without warning, causing a short circuit in the equipment of a rock band. Some witnesses also report break-in main power cables. It's believed that as many as 110 persons may be trapped in the blazing school gymnasium. Firefighting equipment from the neighboring towns of Westover, Maughton, and Lewiston have reportedly received requests for assistance and are now or shortly will be en route. As yet, no casualties have been reported. Ends. 10:46 p.m., May 27th. From the New England AP ticker, 11:22 p.m., urgent, Chamberlain, Maine. A tremendous explosion has rocked Thomas Ewin Consolidated High School in the small Maine town of Chamberlain. 3 Chamberlain fire trucks dispatched earlier to fight a blaze at the gymnasium where a school prom was taking place. We have arrived to no avail. All fire hydrants in the area have been vandalized, and the water pressure from city mains in the area from Spring Street to Grass Plaza is reported to be nil. One fire official said, "The damn things were stripped of their nozzles. They must have spouted like gushers while those kids were burning." 3 bodies have been recovered so far. One has been identified as Thomas B. Mears, a Chamberlain fireman. The 2 others were apparent prom goers. 3 more Chamberlain firemen have been taken to Mutton, receiving hospital suffering from minor burns and smoke inhalation. It's believed that the explosion occurred when the fire reached the school's fuel oil tanks, which are situated near the gymnasium. The fire itself is believed to have started in poorly insulated electrical equipment following a sprinkler system malfunction. Ends 11:22 p.m. So shit is going down, all right? So Sue takes her mother's car. She's only got a permit, but she don't care. So she takes her mother's car and she tries to drive to the school as fast as she can. And then another explosion happens and kind of stops her where she is. Like, she's close to the school at this point, but still like a little ways back. She gets out of her car to better see. She feels the heat of these explosions that are happening. And then a gas station close to her explodes and she blacks out. Now I'm going to read something one of the residents was being questioned about that night, and this is the Q&A. She started downtown, mister. She looked awful. She was wearing some kind of party dress, what was left of it, and she was all wet from that hydrant and covered with blood. She looked like she just crawled out of a car accident, but she was grinning. I never saw such a grin. It was like a death's head, and she kept looking at her hands and rubbing them on her dress, trying to get the blood off and thinking she'd never get it off. And now she was going to pour blood on the whole town and make them pay. It was awful stuff. How would you have any idea what she was thinking? I don't know. I can't explain. This is what I mentioned earlier. Like, people are starting to hear Carrie's thoughts, and Carrie's subconsciously feeding people what she's thinking, but she doesn't realize she's doing it. So people are like, they're like, "Wow, how do you know this?" And they're like, "I don't know. I just did. I just knew what was going on in her head." So what I did mention earlier is that when Carrie uses her powers, her heart beats a lot faster. Like what I said, her grandmother was 66 before she had a heart attack. She was probably using her powers when that happened. Obviously, not this severe, but you know, that's why her grandmother died so young. It was from a heart attack because your heart goes through it. So while she was messing with the fire hydrants that we heard that they were stripped, that was Carrie's doing. And while she was doing that, her heart was beating over 200 times per minute. So when Sue finally comes to, she finds a sheriff and she's like, "You have to find Carrie. You have to get her." Okay. And Sue's hysterical. And the sheriff kind of like brushes her off. He's like, "Okay," like, because he's still trying to figure it out. He's not from Chamberlain. He's from one of the surrounding towns. And then he finds Vic Mooney, who was the class president, and he's hysterical. And he's saying that it was Carrie and that everyone needs to get her because she's the one who's causing all of this this distress for everyone. The sheriff is quickly starting to feel overwhelmed by all the hysterical people he is coming into contact with them, and they all seem to have one thing in common. They know it's Carrie. From the National AP ticker, 11:46 p.m., Chamberlain, Maine. A disaster of major proportions has struck the town of Chamberlain, Maine tonight. A fire believed to have begun at Ewen High School during a school dance has sprung to the downtown area, resulting in multiple explosions that have leveled much of the downtown area. A residential area to the west of the downtown area is also reported to be burning. However, most concern at this time is over the high school where a junior-senior prom was being held. It is believed that many of the prom goers were trapped inside. A Westover fire official summoned to the scene said the known total of dead stood at 67, most of them high school students. Asked how high the total might go, he said, "We don't know. We're afraid to guess. This is going to be worse than the Coconut Grove." At last report, 3 fires were raging out of control in the town. Reports of possible arson are unconfirmed. Ends 11:46 p.m. There were no more AP reports from Chamberlain. So there's a lot going on, okay? In my mind, when we think about the movie, we think of that prom scene and then we kind of think of how it's kind of over, but it's not over. There's still, we're almost done with this, but there's still a lot that happens between now and the end of this book. Carrie finds a church on Carlin Street, which is her street, and she decides to go in the church and she wants to pray. She prayed and there was no answer. No one was there, or if there was, he/it was cowering from her. God had turned his face away, and why not? This horror was as much his doing as hers, and so she left the church, left it to go home and find her mama and make destruction complete. Carrie's going home, okay? But she's not done. She's not just going to go home and pretend none of it happened and go to bed. No, she has other plans. So as Carrie's walking home, she's ripping the electrical cords off and she's letting them slither on the floor, and she catches a house on fire when she does it. Another person catches on fire, like destruction literally in her wake, and she's loving it. She's unhinged. She's lost her freaking marbles, okay? She's relishing in all this. When Carrie walks into the house, Margaret's still in the kitchen and she's got the nice long, sharp as shit knife behind her back. So Margaret starts their conversation by telling Carrie that she had sinned twice with Ralph. The first time she kicked him out and he asked for forgiveness and she gave it to him, and then the second time she enjoyed it so much that she should kill herself. So there's that. Like, Margaret is so unhinged, this lady. So she thinks that all of her sins started and ended with Carrie. Basically, Carrie is Margaret's sin, and now she's like the devil, and Margaret has to complete the circle by getting rid of Carrie. Margaret shows the knife because she's now making it known to Carrie that she's going to kill her. Carrie took a slow, blundering step forward. "I came to kill you, Mama, and you're waiting here to kill me. Mama, it's not right, Mama, it's not." "Let's pray," Mama said softly, her eyes fixed on Carrie's, and there was a crazed, awful compassion in them. The firelight was brighter now, dancing on the walls like dervishes. "For the last time, let us pray." "Oh, Mama, help me," Carrie cried out. She fell forward on her knees, head down, hand raised in supplication. Mama leaned forward, and the knife came down in a shining arc. Carrie, perhaps seeing out of the tail of her eye, jerked back an instant. Instead of penetrating her back, the knife went into her shoulder to the hilt. Mama's feet tangled in the legs of her chair, and she collapsed in a sitting sprawl. And now, this might be twisted, but this is my favorite part. Ready? Okay. Then Carrie said softly, "I'm going to give you a present, Mama." Margaret tried to get up, staggered, and fell back on her hands and knees. "What are you doing?" she croaked hoarsely. "I'm picturing your heart, Mama," Carrie said. "It's easier when you see things in your mind. Your heart is a big, red muscle. Mine goes faster when I use my powers, but yours is going a little slower now. A little slower." Margaret tried to get up again, failed, and forked the sign of the evil eye at her daughter. "A little slower, Mama. Do you know what the present is, Mama? What you always wanted. Darkness, and whatever God lives there." Margaret White whispered, "Our Father who art in heaven, Slower, Mama, slower. Hallowed be thy name. I can see the blood draining back into you. Slower. Thy kingdom come. Your feet and hands like marble, like alabaster. White. Thy will be done. My will, Mama. Slower. On earth. Slower. As it. She collapsed forward, hands twitching. As it is in heaven, Karen whispered. Full stop. That was beautiful. Beautiful revenge. I love it. I mean, is that great? No, probably not, but I still love it. There's a reason why horror is my main jam. It's for that. So after that, Carrie tries to get the knife out of her shoulder. It hurts too much, so she's like, yeah, nope, not going to do that. And she heads outside because she's got one more bone to pick with a mean girl named Chris. At this time, when she leaves her house, it's 1:15 a.m. So we're going to backtrack a little. We're going to go back to 11:20 p.m. This is before the explosions, okay? So Chris and Billy get the hell out of Dodge after they do. And you know what? The prank is so lame. I mean, it's not lame. That was terrifying. But like, it's lame in the fact that they had it all set up, but they don't actually see the prank. They don't see Carrie get drenched in the blood. They don't see the reactions of their faces or nothing. They literally saw nothing. All they went off was their hearing senses. So she pulls the thing. She doesn't think it worked, but if you were standing and saw it, you would have saw the blood splashing Carrie and Tommy. You would have seen the pail fall and hit Tommy and knock him unconscious. You would have seen all of that. But because they were behind the stage, they didn't see shit. And that's like really all that, and you didn't even see any of it. Like, for real? Anyways, that's not here nor there. But anyways, so Chris and Billy, they are being verbally, mentally, and physically abusive with each other. That ends in very, very physical, not okay, like dubious consent sexual things. And then they fall asleep. Again, do not follow their example, whatever you do. And if you are in this example, stop it. Stop. Go away. Get away from them. That my advice to you. Anyways, they fall asleep and they are woken up by someone banging on the door. It's Billy's friend, basically telling them that the town is burning. And this is like, what time is it now? They are woken up 5 minutes of 1 by one of Billy's friends. He's banging on the door and he's like, hey, like basically the town is burning everywhere and Carrie White did it. Billy's like, yeah, no, she didn't. And then he goes, yeah, take a look outside. And then they were like, oh shit. And then they were like, oh, the pails are still out, like the blood pails that they used. Like, we need to go check out and see if it's salvageable. And then the buddy leaves and Billy and Chris are talking and she's like, oh my no, what are we going to do about the pails? And Billy's like, I wore gloves. Like, my ass is covered, but we should try to get rid of the pails if we can. Let's jump in the car and see if they're still there. They get in the car. And as soon as the headlights turn on, Chris screams because who's standing 70 feet away from the car in the front? Carrie. In all of her bloody gory with a huge ass knife sticking out of her shoulder too, to boot. So of course, the sensible thing for Billy to do, by the way, Carrie, the name Carrie is chanting in his head now. The most sensible thing to do is to run her over. So he goes full speed ahead, rushes towards Carrie. Like the vehicle, the car, rushes the car towards Carrie. And Carrie at the last minute is able to stop it with her mind, which the impact sends them sprawling, Chris into the windshield, and Billy gets impaled by the wheel console, I believe it said. Anywho, so they're goners. They're dead. But Carrie's on the ground now. So she's like on the ground in the parking lot, and she's like, I just wish I could turn over and look at the stars while I die. Now, Sue knows that Carrie's mother is dead and that Carrie is hurting. And again, she doesn't know how she knows this. She just knows that it's true. So she goes and looks for Carrie. From the shadow exploded. Whatever any of us may think of the Carrie White affair, it's over. It's time to turn to the future. As Dean McGuffin points out in his excellent Science Yearbook article, if we refuse to do this, we will almost certainly have to pay the piper, and the price is apt to be the high one. A thorny moral question is raised here. Progress is already being made toward complete isolation of the TK gene. It is more or less assumed in the scientific community, see for instance Bork and Hannigan's A View Toward Isolation of the TK Gene with specific recommendations for control parameters in Microbiology Annual, that when a testing procedure is established, all school-aged children will undergo the test as routinely as they now undergo the TB skin patch. Yet TK is not a germ. It is as much a part of the afflicted person as the color of his eyes. If overt TK ability occurs as a part of puberty, and if this hypothetical TK test is performed on children entering the first grade, we shall certainly be forewarned. But in this case, is forewarned forearmed? If the TB test shows positive, a child can be treated or isolated. If the TK test shows positive, we have no treatment except a bullet in the head. And how is it possible to isolate a person who will eventually have the power to knock down all walls? And even if isolation could be made successful, would the American people allow a small, pretty girl child to be ripped away from her parents at the first sign of puberty, to be locked in a bank vault for the rest of her life? I doubt it, especially when the White Commission has worked so hard to convince the public that the nightmare in Chamberlain was a complete fluke. Indeed, we seem to have returned to square one. Hell yeah, you return to square one, because now everyone's aware that this is a gene. This gene can be passed down and it will be dominant in women. So like Carrie, right? But now they're back to square one because like he said, no one's going to agree to that. Like, hey, your girl's going to have powers beyond measures now that she's reaching puberty. We got to lock this down. So maybe we should kill her. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's absurd. No one's going to be down with that. But now they're back to square one because it's your genes. It's what makes you. You can't undo that, you know? So Sue has found Carrie and she's kneeling by Carrie to talk to her. Carrie moaned thickly and her eyes fluttered. The perception of her in Sue's mind sharpened as if mental pictures were coming into focus. Who's there? And Sue, without thought, spoke in the same fashion. Me, Sue Snell. Only there was no need to think of her name. The thought of herself as herself was neither words nor pictures. The realization suddenly brought everything up close, made it real, and compassion for Carrie broke through the dullness of her shock. And Carrie, with faraway dumb reproach, you tricked me. You all tricked me. Carrie, I don't even know what happened. Is Tommy, you tricked me. That happened. Trick, trick, trick. Oh, dirty trick. The mixture of image and emotion was staggering, indescribable. Blood, sadness, fear. The last dirty trick in a long series of dirty tricks. They flashed by in a dizzying shuffle that made Sue's mind reel, helplessly, hopelessly. They shared that awful totality of perfect knowledge. Carrie, don't hurts me. Now, girls, throwing sanitary napkins, chanting, laughing, Sue's face mirrored in her own mind, ugly, caricatured, all mouth, cruelly beautiful. See the dirty tricks, see my whole life, one long dirty trick. Look, Carrie, look inside me. And Carrie looked. The sensation was terrifying. Side note, if you have read Dr. Sleep, this would sound familiar. Her mind and nervous system had become a library. Someone in desperate need ran through her, fingers trailing lightly over shelves of books, lifting some out, scanning them, putting them back, letting some fall, leaving the pages to flutter wildly. This part is hard for me to read because it's not like a lot of sense. Glimpses at me as a kid. Hate him, daddy. Oh, mommy. Wide lips. Oh, teeth, Bobby. Pushed me over. Oh, my knee. Car. Want to ride in the car. We're going to see Aunt Cicely. Mommy, come quick. I made pee. In the wind of memory and still on and on, finally reaching a shelf marked Tommy, subheaded prom. Books thrown open. Flashes of experience. Marginal notations and all the hieroglyphics of emotions more complex than the Rosetta Stone. Looking, finding more than Sue herself had suspected, love for Tommy, jealousy, selfishness, a need to subjugate him to her, will on the matter of taking Carrie, disgust for Carrie herself. She could take better care of herself. She does look just like a goddamn toad. Hate for Miss Desjardins, hate for herself, but no ill will for Carrie personally, no plan to keep her in front of everyone and undo her. The feverish feeling of being raped in her most secret corridors began to fade. She felt Carrie pulling back, weak and exhausted. Why didn't you just leave me alone? Carrie, Mama would be alive. I killed my mama. I want her. Oh, it hurts. My chest hurts. My shoulder. Oh, I want my mama. Carrie, And there were no way to finish that thought. Nothing there to complete it with. Sue was suddenly overwhelmed with terror, the worst, because she could put no name to it. The bleeding freak on this oil-stained asphalt suddenly seemed meaningless and awful in its pain and dying. Oh, Mama, I'm scared. Mama, Mama. Sue tried to pull away, to disengage her mind, to allow Carrie at least the privacy of her dying, and was unable to. She felt that she was dying herself and did not want to see this preview of her own eventual end. Carrie, let me go. Mama, 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 oh. The mental scream reached a flaring, unbelievable crescendo and then suddenly faded. For a moment, Sue felt as if she were watching a candle flame disappear down a long, black tunnel at a tremendous speed. She's dying. Oh my God, I'm feeling her die. And then the lights was gone, and the last conscious thought had been, Mama, I'm sorry. So I stand... I'm still right. I almost said I stand corrected. I don't stand corrected because I'm still right. Sue never apologizes. Carrie apologizes to her mother, who she killed, in apologizing for that. But Sue still never freaking apologized in this entire story. Now we are in part 3 called Wreckage. So everyone is leaving town. Okay, there were 67 seniors that were supposed to graduate that year who passed away in that fire. A total of 440 unalived, 18 unaccounted for. The principal and gym teacher quit after, out of guilt. They both feel like they had some kind of effect on Carrie and could have prevented it to some extent. Is that true? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe so. The town is in shambles. Like, the town cannot, businesses, places are going out of business because there's not people to work. There's not people who want to go anywhere. The town is in mourning, and the town is literally dying before their eyes. Like, half the town was destroyed, and many, many people went with the destruction of the town. Not just the kids. Like I said, 67 seniors, that's a lot. But there's like 50 something seniors left, and they end up going to towns nearby to graduate because they don't have a school anymore. And the whole ending is just super, super fucking sad. So the book that we read, that this is Sue Snell or whatever the heck it's called, My Name is Susan Snell, she's hoping she can get money from her book so she can get the hell out of Chamberlain and kind of find herself. And we're going to end this with a letter. Because we've been talking about these excerpts from these books and stuff, and about how this gene, that this, telekinesis, it will come back. It is not an anomaly. It will happen again. Excerpt from a letter dated May 3rd, 1988. This is 9 years after prom night. From Amelia Jenkins, Royal Knob, Tennessee, to Sandra Jenks, Macon, Georgia. And your little niece is growing like a weed, awfully big for only 2. She has blue eyes like her daddy and my blonde hair, but that'll probably go dark. Still, she's awfully pretty, and I think sometimes when she's asleep how she looks like our mama. The other day, while she was playing in the dirt beside the house, I sneaked and saw the funniest thing. Annie was playing with her brother's marbles, only they was moving around all by themselves. Annie was giggling and laughing, but I was a little scared. Some of them marbles was going right up and down. It reminded me of Grandma. Do you remember when the law came out that time after Pete, and their guns flew out of their hands, and Grammy just laughed and laughed? And she used to be able to make her rocker go even when she wasn't in it. It gave me a real bad turn to think on it. I sure hope she don't get heart spells like Grandma did, remember? Well, I must go and do a wash, so give my best to Rich and take care to send us some pictures when you can. Still, our Annie's awfully pretty and her eyes are as bright as buttons. I bet she'll be a world beater someday. All my love, Amelia. So now we end the story with, bitch, this stuff is about to happen all over again, unless if your daughter is like, I don't know, Miss Popular or whatever, because it's going to happen again. And that's why I really loved these excerpts, and I wanted to kind of read as much of them as I could to you the way it was written, because one, I just don't think I always summarize that well. And two, I think, because like we know the story, okay, we all know the story, but I think it gives a different light on the story when you're reading it like that. I really enjoyed this story. I didn't like it as much the first time around, but I definitely have gotten a lot more appreciation for it the second time around. What do you think of this book? If you've read it, if you haven't, if you saw the movie, what do you think? And do you want to see my book versus movie on this? Because I did do it. And I do think it was pretty darn good, if I say so myself. And if you have made it this far, please give me a red drop of blood. Show me that you're the MVP, and I'll see you next time. Bye.